She called me a fat pig in front of 200 guests, right before her husband slipped the ring on. I can still hear the laughter that followed, the kind that slices straight through your skin. My daughter, my only child, smirked as if she'd just announced something funny. The music stopped. The room turned to look at me, the woman standing too still in a floral dress, 2 sizes too tight. "You don't belong here, Mom. Go sit at the back where no one can see you." Her voice was clear, sharp, almost rehearsed, the kind of cruelty that doesn't come from heat, but from years of quiet contempt. My hand trembled around the champagne glass. It slipped from my fingers, hit the floor, and shattered. For a moment, even the sound of it seemed to beg for mercy. My heart tightened. I wanted to speak, but my tongue felt heavy, like it belonged to someone else. I could only stare at her, my daughter in white lace, looking down at me like I was a stain on her perfect day. If you've ever been humiliated by your own blood, don't scroll away. Stay till the end. You'll want to hear how karma came for them. Like and subscribe. And comment your country name from where you're watching. My name is Evelyn Moore. I'm 68 years old, a retired nurse, a widow, and until that wedding day, I thought I was still loved. I raised my daughter Amanda on my own after her father left. He said he needed space, but what he really needed was someone younger and easier to impress. I worked double shifts at the hospital, saved every penny, and told Amanda that education was her ticket to a better life. I didn't know that ticket would take her so far from me that she'd forget I existed. When she was a child, she'd hold my hand and say I was her hero. I'd pack her lunches, iron her dresses, whisper stories to her when nightmares came. Somewhere along the years, the girl who once begged to sleep beside me turned into a stranger who wouldn't even visit for Christmas. She stopped calling when she moved in with her father. He had money. I had exhaustion. He bought her cars. I sent her homemade cookies that came back unopened. The years passed like slow rain. My house felt emptier, my phone quieter. I spent nights staring at the same kitchen clock, listening to the same silence. When I retired, I thought maybe she'd call more, that maybe the distance had softened, but she didn't. The last time I saw her before the wedding was at her engagement dinner. She barely introduced me to her fiancé, Mark, a tall, smug man who shook my hand like it was a chore. She said, "Mark, this is my mom. She used to be a nurse, used to be." Like my whole life ended at retirement. On the morning of the wedding, I stood in front of my cracked bathroom mirror, trying to zip a dress I hadn't worn in years. It was sky blue, the color Amanda used to say made me look calm. Now it just made me look tired. I brushed my hair back, pinned it carefully, and whispered to my reflection, "You'll be fine." I wanted to look like I belonged, even if I didn't feel it. The ceremony was held in a vineyard outside town, all white tents and polished tables. Her father Richard was there, of course, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my car. When he saw me walk in, he smiled cold, knowing, cruel. "Evelyn," he said, "you made it. I wasn't sure you'd come." He didn't mean it as a greeting. He meant it as a warning. I told him I wouldn't miss my daughter's wedding. He just laughed and walked away, arm around his new wife, Diane, who looked me up and down with polite disgust. During the vows, Amanda wouldn't look at me. She looked everywhere else. The guests, the flowers, the camera, but not me. I thought maybe she was nervous. I tried to convince myself that the comment she made later was just stress. But when she turned to me during the reception, her eyes full of disdain, and said those words, "fat pig," it didn't sound like stress. It sounded like truth. I remember gripping the edge of the table to steady myself. My breath caught. The room blurred for a second. I saw people whispering, pretending not to look. Even Richard smiled faintly, like he was proud of her. My chest burned. I wanted to disappear. I wanted to scream, but instead, I stood there frozen in humiliation until the music started again and everyone pretended it never happened. I left quietly. The night air was cold, the sound of laughter spilling from the tent behind me. I could still hear Amanda's voice echoing inside my head. "You don't belong here." Maybe she was right. Maybe I didn't. My shoes crunched against the gravel as I walked toward the parking lot. My vision was blurry, but I wasn't crying. Not yet. I just kept walking, each step heavier than the last. Halfway to the car, I heard someone following me. I turned, and there he was. Richard, my ex-husband, his face lit by the orange glow of the parking lights. He was smirking. That same smirk he wore the night he told me he was leaving. He looked at me like I was still that woman begging him not to go. "You shouldn't take it so hard," he said softly. "Amanda just wants distance. You know how embarrassing it is for her when you show up uninvited?" Uninvited. My stomach twisted. I gripped my purse tighter. He leaned closer. "You were never good at reading the room, Evelyn. Some of us move on." Then he turned and walked back toward the music, his laughter mixing with the sound of clinking glasses. I stood there for a long time, staring at the vines stretching into darkness. The cold wind tugged at my hair. My heart pounded, but I felt something shifting inside me, something quiet, deep, and final. It wasn't anger. It was realization. They thought I was done. They thought I'd fade away like a stain that washes off with time. But I didn't. I turned toward the road, my chest heavy but steady. The humiliation still burned, but beneath it, a spark had formed. I didn't know it yet. But that night was the beginning of something else, something they'd never see coming. As I drove away from that vineyard, the lights of the wedding grew smaller in the mirror until they vanished completely. I whispered to myself, "Let them laugh tonight," because deep down, I already knew every cruel word would come back to them. I just had to wait. When Richard left, he said he needed to start fresh. Those were his exact words, fresh. Like I was something rotten that had gone bad in his life. I remember standing by the doorway, holding Amanda's school bag, while he packed his last suitcase. He didn't even look at me when he said, "You'll manage, you always do." Then the door shut, and everything inside me went quiet. That day, I promised myself I wouldn't cry in front of my daughter. She was 13. Her hands were shaking, her eyes red. I told her everything would be fine, even though I had no idea how we'd survive. I sold my wedding ring the next morning and paid our rent for the next 3 months. After that, I started working double shifts at the hospital. The smell of antiseptic became my second skin. Every night, I came home to our small house, the one Richard left, temporarily in his name because he said it would be easier for taxes. I believed him. I believed every word that man ever said. The bills kept stacking on the counter. I'd boil water for tea and drink from the same cracked cup because buying a new one felt like betrayal to the old life I lost. Sometimes Amanda would come into the kitchen, watch me count coins, and ask, "Why can't we live like Dad?" I'd force a smile and say, "Because we live like us." She never liked that answer. I think that's when she started drifting away, first in words, then in tone, then completely. When Richard remarried, I didn't go to the wedding. I was still wearing the same shoes from our marriage 25 years earlier. He sent me a photograph through Amanda, him and Diane, standing in front of a white mansion with the caption, "Finally found peace." I tore that photo in half and dropped it in the trash, but Amanda pulled it out and kept it. She said Diane looked like a movie star. I kept telling myself it was just a phase, that she'd understand someday. So I worked harder. When Amanda got accepted into college, I was proud, but the tuition was more than I made in a year. I cashed out what little retirement savings I had and took a small loan under my name. I told her not to worry, that it was worth it. She hugged me then, for the first time in months, and said, "You're the best, Mom." I held on longer than she did. Those years nearly broke me. I aged faster than I realized. My hands began to tremble from exhaustion. My knees hurt from standing too long. Some nights, I fell asleep on the couch, still wearing my hospital shoes. The house felt colder. The walls had lost their color. But whenever I saw Amanda's letters from college, I'd tell myself it was all for something, until her tone started to change. Her messages became shorter. "Busy. Can't talk. Dad's visiting." One day she called me and said Diane had helped her buy a car. I congratulated her, but she replied, "It's nice having someone who believes in me." I laughed softly, pretending not to hear the knife twisting behind her words. I told myself she didn't mean it. Children say things they don't understand. When she graduated, she didn't invite me to the ceremony. I found out from a Facebook post someone else shared. She stood in her cap and gown beside Richard and Diane, her caption reading, "Couldn't have done it without them." My heart stung so hard, I had to sit down. I made tea, like I always did, and watched the steam fade in silence. After that, she visited less. When she did, she'd criticize everything: my hair, my clothes, my old curtains. "Mom, you should take care of yourself. You look tired all the time." She didn't mean concern. It was judgment dressed as advice. I stayed quiet, afraid to drive her further away. Every visit ended with her leaving earlier than planned. Every goodbye felt smaller. One evening, I found a note on my kitchen counter in her handwriting. "You should sell the house, Mom. It's too much for you." I stared at it for a long time. The house Richard left in his name for taxes. I wondered how she knew that. The following week, I got a call from the city clerk's office. They asked me to confirm a few documents about a property transfer. My stomach turned cold. I told them I hadn't signed anything. The woman on the phone hesitated, then said gently, "Masepping, it shows your signature." I asked her to send me a copy. That night, when the email arrived, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the papers through blurry eyes. My name was there, my handwriting copied perfectly. The date marked just 2 months ago. The deed showed that Richard had transferred ownership of the house to Amanda to protect it from future taxes. My name was listed as a consenting co-signer. I couldn't breathe. My hand went numb. I read the document 3 times, hoping I'd misunderstood. I hadn't. The house I'd kept alive through winters without heat and summers without air conditioning. Gone, signed away behind my back. My own daughter's name replacing mine, like I'd never existed. I called her the next morning, my voice shaking. "Amanda, did you know about this?" She sounded calm, too calm. "Dad said it's for the best. You wouldn't understand how these things work." I felt my throat close. "You forged my name," I whispered. She sighed. "You're overreacting. It's still the family home." I looked around the living room as she spoke. The peeling wallpaper, the photo of her as a child holding my hand, the chair where she used to sit and color. Everything around me suddenly looked foreign. I said, "Family home? You took it from me." She paused, her tone turning sharp. "You should be grateful, Mom. You wouldn't manage it anyway." Then she hung up. I sat there for a long time, staring at the wall. The silence pressed against my ears. I tried to stand, but my knees gave out, and I slid to the floor. The cracked teacup rolled from the table and broke into 2 perfect halves beside me. I picked them up, pressing the edges together, but they wouldn't fit anymore. I held those pieces in my hand until my fingers began to bleed from the sharp rim. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying every sacrifice, every late shift, every dollar I sent. I had given her everything, and she'd taken the rest. The next morning, a courier knocked on my door. He handed me an envelope with no return address. Inside was the official legal notice confirming the transfer. The last line read, "All future decisions regarding the property will be made by the current owner, Amanda Moore." My name was gone. My home was gone. My daughter had finished what Richard started. And as I held that letter, I realized something deeper. They hadn't just taken my house, they'd taken the last part of me that still believed in love. I was folding laundry when I heard the knock. It was soft, polite, almost rehearsed. When I opened the door, Diane stood there. Perfect hair, perfect teeth, perfume so heavy it filled the hallway before she even spoke. She smiled, that kind of smile that hides something sharp underneath. "Evelyn," she said sweetly, "it must be strange living here, in what used to be your home." For a second, I forgot how to breathe. The word used to echoed in my head. I stepped aside and told her she could come in. She looked around like she was inspecting something old and broken. Her eyes paused on the cracked teacup, sitting on the counter. "Still drinking from that?" she asked softly. I nodded. "It still holds," I said. She laughed, but there was no warmth in it. I made tea anyway. She sat at my table, crossing her legs, scanning the room like she owned it. "Amanda told me you've been doing well," she said. I smiled, small and tight. She says many things. Diane stirred her tea without drinking it. She's getting married soon. It's going to be lovely. White roses, an open vineyard, a live band. You'll be so proud. I looked at her, waiting for the words that didn't come. She sipped her tea and added, I'm sure she'll send you an invitation soon if she remembers. Her voice was calm, but I could feel the sting behind it. I stared at the steam rising from my cup, pretending not to hear the insult hidden in her tone. My hands were steady, but my chest felt tight. I'm sure she'll remember, I said quietly. Diane leaned forward and touched my hand lightly. You must understand, Evelyn. Weddings are complicated. She doesn't want any tension. Tension. That was her polite word for shame. I swallowed the bitterness and smiled. Of course, I whispered. I noticed the gold bracelet on her wrist, the one Richard bought me for our 15th anniversary. She must have seen me looking, because she turned her wrist and said, Oh, this old thing? It was lying around the house. I thought it was too pretty to waste. I felt the air leave my lungs. I didn't say a word. She smiled again, stood up, and adjusted her coat. Anyway, Richard's been stressed. The company's going through something, bankruptcy, or something close to it. You know how he worries. She caught herself too late, her eyes flicking toward me in alarm. I stayed silent, only watching her. She covered her mistake with another laugh, grabbed her purse and said, You take care, Evelyn. Try not to dwell on the past. Then she left, leaving her perfume and poison behind. The house was quiet again. I looked at the cracked teacup still sitting between us, its edges dark from age. The steam was gone, the tea cold. I whispered to the empty room, bankruptcy or betrayal again. The envelope came with no return address. Inside was a cream-colored card with gold edges. No signature, no warmth, just a single line written in Amanda's tidy handwriting. Wear something simple, please. It didn't sound like an invitation. It sounded like a warning. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, holding that card, staring at the curve of her letters. Even her handwriting looked cold now. On the morning of the wedding, I pulled out my old blue dress, the one Richard once said, made me look gentle. It was worn, a little tight around the waist, but it was clean. I ironed it slowly, pressing each wrinkle like I was smoothing out years of pain. When I arrived at the vineyard, no one greeted me. Amanda glanced at me once, her lips tightening. Her eyes dropped to my shoes before she turned away. Richard stood by the bar, surrounded by laughter. He lifted his glass and said loud enough for everyone to hear, Well, not everyone can age gracefully, huh? The crowd chuckled, and someone added, Guess money helps. I smiled, small and fixed, pretending I didn't hear. My hands were shaking, so I kept them folded in my lap. The dinner went on like a performance. Amanda's friends whispered behind napkins. I could feel every stare slide over me like oil, but I didn't cry. Not once. I just studied their faces, the way they smiled when they thought cruelty was funny, the way Amanda avoided my eyes, afraid of what she might see reflected back. Then as the band started playing, I saw him, a man in a dark suit standing near the doorway watching me. He didn't clap or dance. He just stared quietly. My heart stopped when I realized who it was. The lawyer who once handled Richard's estate. The wedding ended, but I didn't feel like it had. Laughter echoed behind me as I walked toward the parking lot, clutching my purse like it was the last thing keeping me upright. I just wanted to leave before anyone noticed the tears pressing behind my eyes. Then I heard someone call my name. I turned expecting another cruel word, but it wasn't Amanda or Richard. It was the man in the dark suit, the one who'd been watching me all evening. He approached slowly, his expression careful. Mrs. Moore, he said quietly. I didn't want to disturb you earlier, but there's something you should know. I froze. The night breeze brushed against my face, carrying the sound of distant music. What is it? I asked, trying to keep my voice from shaking. He looked around before speaking, like what he had to say wasn't meant for open air. The company your ex-husband runs, Moore Construction, it was bought last week. The buyer wanted to remain anonymous. For a moment I couldn't even breathe. Bought? I repeated. You mean someone else owns it now? He nodded. Yes. Full control transferred on Wednesday. His tone was respectful, but there was something in his eyes, curiosity, maybe pity. I stared at him, my mind racing through decades of pain and debt. Do you know who bought it? He shook his head. All I know is, the payment cleared through an old trust account connected to you. That's why I came. I wanted to make sure you were aware. I felt dizzy. My stomach clenched as I tried to process his words. Connected to me? I whispered. He handed me a small envelope. This came to my office, with your name on it. I think you should open it. Then he turned and left before I could ask more. The paper felt heavy in my hand. I stood there under the parking light, too stunned to move. When I got home, I sat at my kitchen table, the same one where I'd signed bills I couldn't pay and drank cold tea. I couldn't finish. My fingers trembled as I opened the envelope. Inside was a short note, transaction complete, awaiting confirmation of ownership. Beneath it was a reference number and a single line, more construction holdings. My heart pounded. I turned on my old laptop and searched the name. Every click made my breath shorter. There it was. The company Richard had built after leaving me, the same one he'd bragged about at every dinner, the same one that funded Amanda's expensive taste. I scrolled through the public filings. It showed transfer of majority shares pending verification. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely type my password. Then I remembered something I hadn't thought about in years. My father's land in Ohio. When he passed, I inherited a share he left only in my name. I'd sold it quietly years ago, kept the money in a dormant trust account under my maiden name, untouched and forgotten. Richard never knew it existed. My nursing pension, small as it was, had also been funneled into that same account for safekeeping. It was my one secret, my one escape hatch from the life he'd stripped bare. I leaned back in my chair, heart thudding in my chest. Could it be possible? Could that forgotten trust be the anonymous buyer? I opened my email, hands trembling so hard I could barely click. The inbox loaded slowly, as if the universe itself was stalling the truth. Then it appeared, one unread message, marked urgent. The subject line read, Ownership Confirmation. More construction holdings. I opened it, and the words nearly stopped my heart. Congratulations, Mrs. Evelyn Moore. As of this evening, you are the majority owner of Moore Construction. The room went silent. Even the old refrigerator hum faded away. I reread it 3 times, afraid it might vanish if I blinked. My hands covered my mouth, and a strange sound escaped me, a laugh that wasn't joy. Not yet, but something close to release. For years they'd laughed at me. For years they'd taken everything. But tonight the universe handed me their empire, wrapped in silence. I stared at the screen until my reflection appeared in the glow. My tired eyes, the lines around my mouth. The woman they'd all dismissed, I whispered to myself. They have no idea. Then I closed the laptop and sat there in the dark, listening to my heartbeat. It felt like the first sound of power I'd ever owned. I didn't tell anyone about the email. I sat with it for 3 days, reading it over and over, until the shock turned into something colder. I owned the company that had destroyed me. But I couldn't rush. Revenge had to be silent. I used my maiden name when I contacted the corporate office. They thought I was a consultant, sent to review the firm's finances. No one looked twice at a quiet older woman with a clipboard and calm voice. I learned that invisibility is power when you know how to use it. The first time I stepped into Moore Construction, I felt my throat tighten. The walls were still the same dull gray Richard had loved. I watched employees laugh, gossip, and waste hours. No one recognized me. I walked past his office, empty that day, and felt a strange satisfaction knowing he was building a future on sand. They let me review files without question. I spent hours flipping through invoices, payroll sheets, and tax records. What I found was filth, unpaid taxes, fake salaries, ghost employees who collected paychecks under false names. My stomach turned as I realized Richard had been funneling money for years. He wasn't just careless, he was corrupt. I didn't feel anger anymore, just precision. Every number I wrote down was a weapon. Every name was proof. I took pictures, stored copies on a flash drive, and hid everything inside a box of old nursing files in my closet. When I got home, I poured myself tea and started searching for someone who could help me quietly. The next morning, I called a forensic accountant I'd known from the hospital, a man who once investigated a stolen pension fund. He didn't recognize my voice at first. I told him I needed discretion. He said, "If this is about someone hiding money, you came to the right person." I also hired a small legal team under the trust's name. No one knew I was behind it. Days turned into weeks. The accountant sent updates in short, tense emails, each one worse than the last. When we finally met in person, he looked uneasy. "Mrs. Moore," he said softly, "you were right. The fraud runs deep. If you expose this, Richard could lose everything, and your daughter's husband works there too." I sat in the dark that night, staring at the laptop screen until my eyes burned. The proof of Richard's fraud was sitting right in front of me. One click, and I could destroy him. But I hesitated. My hand hovered over the mouse, trembling. Revenge or forgiveness? I whispered the words to myself, but they sounded hollow. Forgiveness was for people who had something left to lose. I had already lost everything. I closed my eyes and heard every insult like echoes in an empty hallway. Fat, pig, useless woman, burden. They came back one by one, each heavier than the last. Amanda's laughter at the wedding, Richard's smirk in the parking lot, Diane's polished voice telling me to move on. My chest tightened until it hurt to breathe. For a long time, I just sat there, letting the silence press against me. The next morning, I opened the old photo box from the closet. Dust rose in the light. As I lifted the lid, pictures of birthdays, scraped knees, late nights at the hospital, my hands feeding Amanda mashed potatoes, her baby cheeks round with joy. Another photo, me behind the wheel of our first car, smiling though the seat was torn and the gas tank nearly empty. I'd carried them both, year after year, while they learned to live without me. I spread the photos across the table like evidence in a case only I could see. My throat burned as I whispered, "This is what you forgot." I picked one photo, the one where Amanda sat on my lap, holding her first report card, both of us smiling like the world was still kind. I placed it inside an envelope with a single note that read, "From the woman you tried to erase." Then I mailed it to Richard's office. No return address, no explanation, just silence. The kind that unsettles the guilty. For the first time in years, I felt something close to calm. Not peace, just stillness before a storm. I made tea, sat by the window, and watched the steam fade. My phone buzzed on the counter, breaking the quiet. It was my lawyer. His voice was low, urgent. "Evelyn, they're filing for bankruptcy next week. You need to announce ownership, or they'll sell everything." The morning of the hearing felt colder than usual. I woke before sunrise, not from nerves, but from something deeper. A sense of stillness that only comes before a storm. I didn't dress in black, like I used to for humiliation. I chose gray, quiet, neutral, unreadable. I looked at my reflection and whispered, "Today, silence will speak for me." At the courthouse, I sat at the back while lawyers shuffled papers and whispered in low voices. Richard stood near the front, his suit pressed, his arrogance intact. Diane was beside him, pearls at her throat, pretending not to worry. But I saw it, the tremor in her hand, the flicker in his jaw. I almost pitied them. Almost. The clerk called for the Moore Construction bankruptcy hearing. The words echoed off the marble walls like a funeral bell. I walked forward, each step steady. Richard turned, his expression twisting from irritation to confusion. He wasn't expecting me. He never did. "Evelyn," he said under his breath, his voice cracking in disbelief. I didn't answer. I just took my seat beside my lawyer, placed my folder neatly on the table, and waited. The judge entered. Everyone rose. My heart beat slow and heavy, like it had learned patience after decades of waiting. The judge began reading the petition. I barely heard the words. Debt, foreclosure, unpaid taxes. I focused on Richard's face instead, watching arrogance drain into panic. He leaned over to his attorney, whispering frantically. I knew what was coming, and I let the silence stretch until it became unbearable. Then the judge cleared his throat. As of last week, more construction was purchased in full by a new majority owner. The court recognizes Mrs. Evelyn Moore as the legal proprietor. The words fell like thunder. The room froze, papers stopped rustling. I could hear a gasp. Diane's hand flying to her mouth, Amanda whispering something I couldn't catch. Richard turned to me, eyes wide, lips parting like he might still talk his way out. "Evelyn," he stammered, "this must be some mistake." I stood slowly. My voice was calm, low, deliberate. "That's not a mistake, Richard. You built this company on my silence. Now my silence owns it." I turned to face him fully. "I don't shout anymore. I own what you mocked." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Years of humiliation had turned into something sharper than anger. Clarity. I watched his mouth open, then close. He had no script for this. Diane's hand trembled as she reached for him. Amanda, pale as paper, sank into her chair, whispering, "Mom, what did you do?" I looked at her, steady and tired. "What you taught me," I said. "I learned from you. People only hear when it hurts." The judge banged the gavel. "Mrs. Moore, congratulations on your ownership. This hearing is adjourned." I gathered my papers and stood. My lawyer tried to speak, but I lifted a hand. "No statements. Let them process it." He nodded silently. As I turned to leave, Richard called after me. His voice cracked with something I hadn't heard in years. "Fear. Evelyn, please. You can do this. Everything will fall apart." I stopped by the doorway and looked back at him. "It already did," I said softly. "You just didn't notice." The room felt smaller then, like the walls were closing in on them. Diane tried to steady him, but he pulled away. The color drained from his face. He muttered something I couldn't hear, his eyes unfocused. For one brief second, I saw the man I'd once loved, desperate, broken, human. Then his knees buckled. He hit the floor with a dull thud. People shouted. Diane screamed his name. The bailiff rushed forward. I didn't move. I just stood there, my hands clasped, calm as stone. Decades of humiliation, debts, loneliness, all of it gathered inside me, and then finally, quietly, dissolved. Amanda turned toward me, eyes full of tears. "Mom, help him," she cried. Her voice cracked on the last word. I looked at her the way she once looked at me, distant, unsure if compassion still existed between us. "He didn't need my help when I begged for his," I said. My tone wasn't cruel. It was factual. Paramedics were called. They wheeled him out on a stretcher, Diane clutching his hand, still screaming. I followed them with my eyes until the door closed behind them. Then I gathered my folder, pressed it to my chest, and walked out. Outside, the wind was sharp against my face. The sky had turned gray, like the color of my coat. I took a slow breath and whispered, "That's enough. Not revenge, not victory, just balance, long overdue." When I reached my car, I looked at my reflection in the window. The same face they once called weak, worthless, unwanted, now unreadable, unbreakable. I smiled faintly. "Karma," I murmured. "You took your time, but you came." Amanda called 3 days after the hearing. Her voice shook like she'd been crying for hours. "Mom, can we talk?" I almost didn't answer. I'd spent years waiting for her to want to talk, and when she finally did, her voice sounded like a stranger's. I told her I'd stop by in the afternoon. When I pulled up to her house, the front yard looked overgrown, the paint peeling. The same house Richard helped her buy. The same house she once bragged about as proof she'd made it. She opened the door before I could knock. Her eyes were swollen, her hair messy, her hands twisting the hem of her shirt. "Come in," she whispered. The living room looked bare, boxes stacked, furniture missing. She motioned for me to sit on the couch, but I stayed standing. "Mark lost his job," she said, voice breaking. "After everything that happened at the company, no one will hire him. We're behind on payments." I nodded, saying nothing. She kept talking. Faster now, like words could save her. "We're going to lose the house, Mom. I don't know what to do. I know you're mad, but I didn't mean what I said at the wedding. I was angry. I was stupid. Her eyes searched mine for softness. Mom, please, help us. Just this once. Her words hit me like cold rain. I looked around the room, the picture still hanging, the smell of desperation thick in the air. I remembered sitting in this same house years ago, handing her envelopes of cash while pretending not to see Diane's bracelet on her wrist. I told myself it was love, but love without respect is just debt waiting to be collected. I spoke quietly, the way people do when the fight is already over. You said you didn't mean what you said, but neither did your father when he promised love. Her face froze. She whispered, "Please, Mom." I shook my head. You both took everything and called it family. Now you know how it feels when everything is gone. Tears ran down her cheeks, but I didn't move. I wanted to reach for her, but some part of me couldn't. Forgiveness without change is surrender, and I had surrendered enough. I turned toward the dining room and saw it. The same wooden chair where she once told me to sit in the back, where no one can see you. It was still there, pushed slightly away from the table. I stared at it for a moment and said softly, "You can keep it. That seat was always yours." She sank to her knees, sobbing. I walked past her, the floor creaking beneath my shoes. When I opened the door, a gust of wind swept through the house, rattling the empty frames on the wall. Behind me I heard her whisper, "I'm sorry, but the words came too late, like rain after a drought that's already cracked the ground." Outside, the air smelled of rain. I stood by my car for a moment, staring at the clouds gathering above. I should have felt triumph, maybe satisfaction, but all I felt was quiet. Not peace, just a deep, hollow calm. I got in, started the engine, and drove away, leaving behind the sound of her crying and that empty chair waiting for someone else's guilt. When I got home, the house felt heavier than usual. I took off my coat, poured a cup of tea, and sat at the kitchen table. The same table where I'd once cried over unpaid bills, the same one where I'd planned every quiet step of my revenge. I thought of Amanda as a child again, her small hands gripping mine, her voice saying, "You're my favorite person in the world." I wanted to believe that little girl still existed somewhere inside her, but I'd learned the hard way that love without respect can't survive time. The doorbell rang. My heart jumped. When I opened the door, no one was there, only an envelope on the porch, sealed with the lawyer's firm stamp. My fingers trembled as I brought it inside and tore it open. Inside was a single page. I scanned the lines once, twice, before my eyes stopped on the words that changed everything. Final confirmation. Full transfer complete. More construction is now solely under your control. I sat down slowly, the paper trembling in my hands. For years, I'd wanted justice. Now I had it. Total control, total silence. I looked around the kitchen, the chipped walls, the old clock, the same teacup with its hairline crack. Everything that had been taken from me had found its way back, but it didn't feel like victory. It felt like closure. I folded the letter carefully and placed it beside my cup. Then I whispered into the empty room, "It's over." For the first time in decades, no one interrupted me. The house stayed quiet, as if even the walls were finally listening. They called me cruel for staying silent, but silence was the only thing that ever gave me peace. Months have passed since the courtroom. More construction runs smoothly now, but I keep my distance. I don't visit the office, and I don't attend meetings. I sign papers from home, drink tea, and let the world keep guessing how the quiet woman they once mocked ended up owning everything they tried to steal. The money comes in every quarter, more than I could ever spend. I didn't buy a new house or fancy clothes. I didn't even replace the cracked teacup. Instead, I donated half of my first profit to a local women's shelter downtown. I remember standing in their small lobby, handing the director a check. She looked at the number twice before meeting my eyes. "Are you sure about this, Mrs. Moore?" she asked. I smiled, completely. That place felt familiar. The smell of coffee, the faint sound of crying behind closed doors, women speaking softly so no one would hear. I saw pieces of myself in them, women who had given too much, believed too long, and stayed too quiet. I didn't tell them who I was, or what I'd done. They didn't need to know. I just wanted them to have what I once begged the world for: safety, a locked door, and a clean start. When I got home, the afternoon light filled the kitchen. The house was finally still. No arguments, no echoes of old promises. I sat at the same table where I used to cry over bills, tracing the grain of the wood with my fingers. Everything looked the same, but it felt different. For the first time in years, the silence didn't scare me. It comforted me. I thought about Amanda. She still calls sometimes, short messages, asking if I'm okay. I answer politely, but the conversations end quickly. There's distance now. Not anger, just air. Maybe someday she'll understand what she broke. Maybe she won't. That part isn't mine to fix. I've learned that love doesn't always mean rescue. Sometimes it means letting the other person live with the truth they created. Every night before bed, I open my laptop to check company updates. My name sits at the top of every document. I never thought power could feel so quiet. It doesn't roar. It doesn't need to. It just exists, steady and unbothered, like the tide. I used to think revenge meant destroying the people who hurt you. Now I know it's about rebuilding yourself so completely that their names no longer sting. Last week, I walked past a cafe downtown. Through the glass, I saw Diane sitting alone, staring into her phone. Her hair had gone gray. Her nails, once perfect, were chipped. She didn't see me. I stood there for a moment, watching her stir her drink without drinking it, then walked away. No hate, no thrill, just understanding. Time had done the work for me. At home, I looked at my reflection in the window. My hair has thinned, my face has lines, but my eyes are calm now. The woman staring back isn't the one who begged for love at her daughter's wedding or cried over a stolen house. She's someone new, someone whole. I whispered to the glass, "You made it," and meant it. The next morning, I took another check to the shelter. The director hugged me this time. "You've changed lives," she said. I smiled and told her, "No, I just listened." That night, I wrote a note and slipped it inside my company's safe. It said, "If you ever forget who you are, remember what silence can build." I sealed it shut and walked away. I don't dream of the past anymore. I dream of quiet mornings, of sunlight on my table, of peace that doesn't depend on anyone else. Sometimes, I think about the sound of the glass shattering at the wedding, how everyone turned to watch me fall apart. They thought that was the moment I broke. They were wrong. That was the moment I began. If you've ever been called names by your own child, I hope my story reminds you. Silence isn't weakness. It's just waiting. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from, and if my story reached your heart tonight. Before I went to bed, I walked past the hallway mirror. For a second, I stopped and looked again. My reflection stood tall, shoulders back, eyes soft but steady. I didn't flinch this time. I didn't look away. I turned off the light and walked past her. Strong, graceful, untouchable. And for the first time in my life, I smiled.